That night was the craziest yet the most exciting night of my life. It was a quiet Friday when it happened. I lay on my back, staring at the faint patterns of moonlight on the ceiling, my thoughts scattered and restless. I felt lonely because my husband Henry was away on a business trip for the next 2 months still, and I had already not seen him for 3 weeks now. It was only when the soft creak of the door broke through the stillness that I realized I wasn't alone. I sat up slightly, squinting toward the faint figure in the doorway. My 19-year-old son, Alex, stood there, his broad shoulders outlined by the dim light from the hallway. He hesitated, one hand gripping the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice laced with hesitation. I rubbed my eyes, my heart already tightening at the sound of his voice. "Alex, what's wrong?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood frozen, his shadow stretching across the room. Finally, he stepped inside, his bare feet making soft thuds against the carpet. There was something about the way he moved, hesitant, almost afraid, that made the air in the room feel heavier. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2:14 a.m. Alex wasn't the type to wake me unless something was really bothering him. My chest tightened as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, motioning for him to come closer. "What's going on?" I asked gently. He hesitated again before sitting on the edge of the bed, his posture stiff, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a moment I watched him, waiting, but he kept his gaze fixed on the floor. The tension radiating from him was almost palpable. "Alex, you can talk to me," I said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." He let out a shaky breath, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. It's hard to explain," he said finally. "I've been feeling something. I've been feeling different, and I don't know what to do about it." His words sent a ripple of unease through me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Different how?" He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine with an intensity I wasn't prepared for. "It's about someone," he said. "Someone I've been thinking about a lot. Someone you are not going to expect." Relief briefly flickered through me. Maybe this was about a girl at school, a crush he didn't know how to handle. Alex had always been shy about his feelings, keeping them bottled up until they threatened to overflow. "Okay," I said, offering him a reassuring smile. "Who is it? Someone from school?" He shook his head quickly, his gaze dropping again. "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not someone from school." "Then who?" I pressed gently, though a strange unease was beginning to creep into my chest. "Alex, you can tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as if he were gathering every ounce of courage he had. When he spoke again, his voice was trembling. "It's you, Mom," he said finally. "It's always been you." The words hit me like a tidal wave, pulling the air from my lungs. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't think. My mind raced to make sense of what he'd just said, but the sheer weight of it left me reeling. "Alex," I began, my voice faltering. What are you saying?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. His hands ran through his hair, tugging at the strands as though trying to physically pull the words from his mind. "I know how it sounds," he said quickly. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. I've tried for so long to push it away, to ignore it, but it's always there." I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear his words. "Alex, this isn't—" "Don't tell me it's not real," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "I know what I feel. I've never felt this way about anyone else. It's not just admiration or some stupid crush. It's something way deeper, Mom." "Alex," I said again, my voice trembling. "You're my son. What you're feeling, it's not love. It's something else. Something— It is love," he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "You're everything to me, Mom. You're the only one who's ever understood me. The only one who's ever made me feel like I'm worth something. How can that not be love? Tears stung my eyes as I tried to process his words. My son, my sweet boy, who I had raised and loved unconditionally, was pouring out feelings I couldn't understand, feelings I couldn't reciprocate, but yet something in me excited me. Now I think back at it. I think I didn't notice it yet. I think I tried to ignore it, and so I said, "Alex, you're confused. You're going through a lot right now, and maybe these feelings—" "I'm not confused," he said, turning to face me. His eyes were glassy with unshed tears, his jaw set with a determination that made my chest ache. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. At that moment, I noticed it. I could feel the way he was attracted to me, and I didn't want to turn away from it. But still, as I am his mom, I took responsibility to ignore it. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Alex," I said gently, "these feelings, they'll pass. I promise you they'll pass. And when they do, you'll see things more clearly." "What if they don't?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "What if this is who I am? What if this is how I'm supposed to feel?" My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't have the answers he was searching for, didn't know how to ease the pain that was so evident in his eyes. All I could do was hold on to the hope that time would bring clarity, that this moment wouldn't define us. "You're not alone in this," I said finally, my voice trembling but resolute. "We'll get through it, Alex. Together." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he said softly. "I can't lose you." "You won't," I said firmly, squeezing his arm. "No matter what, I'll always be here." "You know what? Why don't you join me for tonight? Maybe that would help a bit," I said, while turning myself back under my sheets again. He nodded and slowly stepped into the bed. Then, I grabbed him with me and I felt something. I didn't mention it to him, of course, so I just said, "Good night, sweetie." And he smiled at me. The silence that followed was heavy but not unbearable. It was the kind of silence that held promises, fragile but sincere. And as he closed his eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope that we could weather this storm, no matter how impossible it seemed. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, and I was right. A night like this was coming again, which would end in a totally different way. This night, nothing happened, but there was more coming. Because love, especially love as complicated as this, doesn't fade quietly. It demands to be reckoned with, and I had no idea what that reckoning would look like. The morning after Alex's confession felt surreal. The quiet of the house, usually comforting, now pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. Every corner, every familiar object seemed to hum with the unspoken tension between us. I busied myself with chores, hoping the routine would ground me, but my hands trembled as I folded laundry, and my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What did this mean for us? For him? For me? The clatter of a chair in the kitchen jolted me from my thoughts. Alex was sitting at the table, staring into a bowl of cereal that looked as untouched as my cup of coffee on the counter. His hair was unkempt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He hadn't slept, and neither had I. "Morning," I said cautiously, breaking the silence. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he replied, his voice hoarse. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the sound of the liquid filling the mug louder than it should have been. I joined him at the table, the distance between us feeling both too far and too close. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. "Alex, about last night." "I meant what I said," he interrupted, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his eyes. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't." I closed my eyes briefly, willing myself to stay calm. "I know you're being honest," I said softly. "But Alex, what you're feeling, It's not something we can act on. It's not something we should act on. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Why not? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Why does love have to fit into rules and boundaries? Isn't love supposed to be free? I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Love isn't just about what we feel, Alex, I said. It's about what's right, what's good for everyone involved. And this, what you're saying, it could hurt us both. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. That's the last thing I want. I know, I said, reaching across the table to place a hand over his. And I don't want to hurt you either. That's why we have to handle this carefully. We need to find a way to move past this. His fingers tightened around mine, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who'd held my hand when he was scared, who'd looked to me for guidance and comfort. But this was different. The way he looked at me now was different. I don't know if I can move past it, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, but I'll try. For you. Tears welled in my eyes, and I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. That's all I ask. The days that followed were a blur of awkward conversations and forced normalcy. Alex tried to keep his distance, retreating to his room or spending long hours out of the house. I told myself it was for the best, that the space would help him sort through his feelings. But I missed him. Missed the easy rapport we'd shared before everything had changed. From the night he confessed, we slept in the same bed every night, but still, I noticed there was a distance between us. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard the front door open and close. Alex stepped into the kitchen, his hair damp from the rain. He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to say something. Hey, I said, trying to keep my tone light. You're just in time. Dinner's almost ready. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to the counter and leaned against it, his arms crossed. I've been thinking, he said finally. I turned off the stove and faced him, my heart pounding. About what? About us, he said, his gaze steady. About what I said that night. I swallowed hard, bracing myself. I immediately knew what night he was talking about, of course. Alex, I thought we agreed. I know, he interrupted, and I'm not here to argue. I need to say this. I nodded, motioning for him to continue. I've been trying to figure out what to do with these feelings, he said, his voice low but firm. And I realized something. I don't want to lose what we have, Mom. Even if it's not what I want it to be, I'd rather have you in my life as my mom than risk losing you completely. Relief washed over me, though it was tempered by the sadness in his voice. Alex, you're not going to lose me, I said. No matter what, I'll always be here for you. He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. I know, but it's hard. It's really hard. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. It's going to take time, I said gently. But you're strong, Alex, and I'll help you through this, however I can. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the tension between us seemed to ease. Thanks, Mom, he said, his voice soft. That means a lot. We stood there in the kitchen, the rain tapping against the windows, and for the first time in days, I felt like we were going to be okay. But life has a way of complicating things when you least expect it. Because just when I thought we'd found some semblance of peace, something happened that threatened to unravel everything. The uneasy truce Alex and I had established held for a time, fragile but functional. He made an effort to smile more, to laugh at my jokes, and to join me for meals like he used to. I clung to those moments, trying to convince myself that things were improving. But late at night, when the house was silent and I was alone with my thoughts, the weight of his confession lingered. One evening, after a long day of work, I found Alex in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. An old sitcom played, its laugh track echoing awkwardly in the otherwise quiet room. He looked up as I walked in, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" I asked, sitting beside him. He shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking." I hesitated before speaking. "About anything in particular?" He let out a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "When am I not thinking about this?" My stomach twisted. "Alex, I thought we were moving past this." "I'm trying," he said quickly. "I really am. But it's not that simple. You can't just turn feelings off like a switch." "I know," I said, my voice soft. "And I don't expect you to. But we have to keep working on this. For both our sakes." He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine. "Have you ever thought about it?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "About us? About what it would be like if things were different?" I froze, his question catching me off guard. "Alex, Don't lie to me," he said, his tone more pleading than demanding. "Just tell me the truth." I looked away, my thoughts racing. The truth was complicated, tangled in emotions I didn't fully understand. Of course I'd thought about it. How could I not, after what he'd said? But acknowledging those thoughts, even to myself, felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "It doesn't matter what I've thought," I said finally, forcing my voice to remain steady. "What matters is doing the right thing. And this isn't right." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you think that. But what if—" "No, Alex," I said firmly, cutting him off. "There is no what if. We're not going to have this conversation." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. "You're scared," he said finally. "Yes, I am," I admitted. "Because this isn't just about you or me. It's about everything we've built, everything we stand to lose." But I was lying. I was scared. He was right about that. But for the wrong reason. I was scared to tell him that for the last couple of days, I felt something too. Something I was scared to tell him. He didn't respond, and the silence that followed was deafening. Finally he stood, his movements stiff and deliberate. "I'm going for a walk," he said, heading for the door. "Alex," I began, but he was already gone. The hours passed slowly, each minute dragging like an eternity. I sat by the window, watching the street, my worry mounting with every moment Alex didn't return. It wasn't until nearly midnight that I heard the door open. I rushed to the entryway, relief flooding through me as I saw him step inside, soaked from the rain. "Alex, where have you been?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Walking," he said simply, shaking the water from his hair. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to him. "You're going to get sick," I said, my worry spilling over as irritation. "You can't just disappear like that." He sighed, running the towel over his face. I needed to clear my head. "And did it help?" I asked, crossing my arms. He looked at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Not really." Something in his tone made me falter. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Alex, we can't keep going like this. It's tearing us both apart." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't know how to stop. Maybe we need help," I suggested. "Someone to talk to, a therapist." His lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You think a therapist is going to understand this?" "They might," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself, or at least help us figure out how to move forward. He shook his head, the towel dropping to the floor. "No one can fix this, Mom. No one can change how I feel." His words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The worst part was even that I had still not told him that I felt something too that night. and that I was the one lying to him, trying to avoid my feelings for him too. I knew that, and still I kept my mouth shut. At least for now. The following days were a blur of avoidance and awkward conversations. Alex tried to act normal, but the tension between us was palpable. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to snap, that something came one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. Alex had been unusually quiet all day, his movements tense and deliberate. As I loaded the dishwasher, he leaned against the counter, watching me. "Mom," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence, "I need to tell you something." I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "What is it?" "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine. Alex, we've talked about this," I began, but he shook his head. "No, you don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "I can't just turn off how I feel. I can't keep pretending I'm okay when I'm not." "Then what do you want me to do?" I asked, my frustration bubbling over. "What do you expect me to say?" "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. I need you to see me, to understand how much this is tearing me apart." "I do see you," I said, my own voice trembling now. "I see you every day, Alex, and it breaks my heart to see you like this, but I don't know how to fix it." He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "You can't fix it," he said, "but maybe we don't have to." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Alex, what are you saying?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed the distance between us, his hand brushing against mine. My breath caught, the air between us suddenly electric. But the moment didn't last. I stepped back, breaking the connection. "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking. We can't. His face crumpled, pain etched into every line. "I'm sorry," he whispered, turning and walking away. I stood there, my heart racing, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me, because no matter how much I tried to deny it, something inside me had responded to him, and that terrified me more than anything. I thought back of the nights we had spent together, the last couple of nights he had been touching me more than first, and I noticed I did more to him too. I think he noticed it, and that's why he started the conversation. But the days after that moment in the kitchen were like walking through a storm, unpredictable and overwhelming. Alex and I avoided each other more than ever. When we did cross paths, the silence between us spoke louder than any words could. I told myself it was for the best, that this space was what we both needed. But the truth was, every time I saw him retreat to his room, every time I caught the flash of pain in his eyes, it tore at me. I spent nights replaying the scene over and over. The way he'd looked at me, the weight of his words, the way my heart had betrayed me in that brief, fleeting moment of connection. It wasn't right. It wasn't. But denying the complexity of what we were feeling only seemed to deepen the wound. One evening, as I sat in the living room, a book lying forgotten in my lap, Alex came in. He hesitated at the doorway, as if unsure whether he was welcome. His hair was messy, his expression guarded. This was the moment I just had to confess. Just tell him what I felt. "Alex," I said finally, my voice quieter than usual. He looked up, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Hey," he replied. "What's up?" He stepped further into the room but didn't sit, pacing slowly near the edge of the coffee table. "I wanted to talk," I said, glancing at me briefly before looking away again. "I know things have been hard for both of us." He nodded, closing the book and setting it aside. "They have. But Mom, I don't want you to think I don't care. I do. More than you know." He stopped pacing, turning to face me. "I know you care," I said. "That's why this is so hard. Because no matter how much I try to let go, no matter how much I tell myself to move on, I can't." "Mom?" he began, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish," I said. I've spent so much time trying to figure out what's wrong with me, why I feel this way. But the more I think about it, the more I realize it's not wrong to feel love, is it? Even if it doesn't fit the rules, even if it scares people. I swallowed hard, my own words striking something deep inside me. Love isn't wrong, I said carefully, but sometimes acting on it is, especially when it could hurt the people we care about. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer but needed to hear it anyway. I get that, he said. I do. But what am I supposed to do with these feelings? Bury them? Pretend they don't exist? No, I finally said, shaking my head. You don't have to pretend. I need to confess something too, and I'm just going to tell this to help you, to channel your feelings into something that helps you grow, not something that holds you back. He sank into the chair across from me, his shoulders slumping. That's easier said than done, Mom. But tell me, what do you have to confess? Well, Alex, I said softly, I think you might have already noticed it a little for the last couple of nights while we were sleeping together. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, to my surprise, he let out a quiet laugh. Your touches? He asked. Of course I noticed, but I told myself you did that to make me feel good. To be honest, they only make me feel lost. They make me feel so close to what I want, but yet so far away. You're not lost, I said, leaning forward. You're just finding your way. And that's okay. It's part of growing up. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. I don't want to lose you, Mom, he said. I can't lose you. You won't, I said, my voice firm. No matter what, I'm here. That will never change. At that moment, without him noticing, my heart was pounding high up in my chest. I still hadn't told him how I felt, and that those touches were not only for his benefit, they were also because of what I wanted, deep inside. So I decided to not let him come in between anymore. I had to clear my thoughts and tell him how I felt. But let me finish what I was going to say, Alex. Those touches, they were not to make you feel good. They what? He said. I did that because I felt something too, I confessed. In fact, I still feel something, Alex. I was scared to tell you because I am your mom, and it is wrong. It cannot be true what we feel for each other, but I can't deny what I am feeling. He stayed silent for a moment, and then he leaned towards me, grabbing my leg. Alex, I said, we can't do this. What about Dad? We can. No one has to know. He whispered, but yet I saw hesitation in his eyes. I leaned towards him, kissing him intensely, but not for long. I knew we couldn't do this, and I knew he wasn't sure either, so I pushed him away. Let's just get a good night's rest and then we'll talk tomorrow, okay? I said. He nodded, but we both felt the tension wasn't gone. We both went to the bathroom to brush our teeth and make ourselves ready for bed. While changing into my pajamas, I smiled at him while he was washing his face. I went to the bedroom and crawled into my bed. For the last couple of weeks, from that first night of his confession on, we had been sleeping together, so it was pretty normal for him to join me. A couple of moments later, he entered the room, and before he got to the bed, I opened the sheets for him to step into. As I mentioned earlier, the tension still wasn't gone, and so I said, let's just make sure we take some good rest, and then we discuss all this tomorrow before Dad returns. Okay? All right, he said. It felt like he had already resigned himself to the fact that nothing was going to happen, but I certainly hadn't, unfortunately enough. I turned off the nightlight and said, good night, honey, turning away from him. Good night, Mom, I heard. My mind was spinning. A few minutes felt like hours, and my thoughts were all over the place. At one moment, my foot touched his leg, partly on purpose, but yet partly by accident. He didn't turn away, and before I knew it, I pulled him closer to me. He grabbed my leg, and I turned around. I still hesitated for a moment, but I let it all happen. I kissed him, and we even went further than kissing. I am not going to go into detail about what exactly happened, but I let myself go, and for a moment, I felt alive. I could forget all that had worried me in the last couple of weeks. I closed my eyes, letting the moment wash over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. This wasn't wrong. It wasn't confusing. It was love, pure and simple love, and it was the kind of love that had grown naturally between us, blossoming out of years of care, trust, and understanding. That's what I told myself while we were busy. But as quick as it started, as quick as it ended, I guess it was a bit too exciting for him. I can imagine. When Alex pulled back, he smiled at me. "We're okay, right?" I nodded and made my way to the bathroom. The next few weeks were better, easier even. Alex seemed more at peace, though there were still moments when the tension between us resurfaced. His father had returned, and he started spending more time outside, hanging out with friends, and even picking up some of the hobbies he'd abandoned in the last year. I threw myself into my routines, finding solace in the small, everyday tasks that kept life moving forward. But as much as I wanted to believe we were healing, the undercurrent of what had passed between us remained. It was an invisible thread, binding us together in a way neither of us could fully escape. Up until this point, I still haven't told my husband about what happened, and Alex and I haven't talked about it either. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to think of it. What are your thoughts on it? I'm curious about other people's opinions on this, and that's why I am telling this story. It is crazy what happened, but I can't deny it, and on top of that, I am never able to turn things back.